Hi, my name is Emily Menon-Bender, and I'm presenting today joint work with Angelina McMillan-Major and Batya Friedman. We are all at the University of Washington, and this is titled Data Statements, Documenting the Datasets Used for Training and Testing Natural Language Processing Systems. What we're talking about here is scholarly communication about datasets. And the idea here is that we want to be able to communicate clearly to other scholars, to people building language technology based on our datasets, to people buying that language technology or setting it up for companies and maybe even government agencies, and also for people who are working in the public interest who need information about language technology that is being deployed. This initiative is called Data Statements for Natural Language Processing, and I have some references there where you can read about what we're doing. So what's going on in NLP, that is natural language processing, and the way that we use data? The first thing is that most NLP research and products are currently built with machine learning. And what that means is computer models that are trained on large sets of examples where each input is paired with some expected output. So in some cases, that might be the output is a missing word given the context, or it might be in automatic transcription, the output is orthography and the input is audio, and so on. And the idea is that at training time, the models take the input, make their guess about the output, see the actual output, and then adjust their parameters to make their predictions a little bit closer if they were wrong. The current trend in all of this is something called deep learning, also neural networks, which is a way of taking advantage of data in this way that is particularly good at getting high value from enormous data sets. And in particular, there's this training idea called pre-training, where they take very, very large data sets, like hundreds of billions of gigabytes of data, and use that to just do the language modeling task, which is, given the context, predict the missing words. And then once you have that very large pre-trained model, it takes only a little bit of data to fine-tune it for other tasks, like, for example, predicting the sentiment or labeling the sentiment of some text. What are our data needs in NLP? Well, we need training data, and that really the more the better is the attitude that people take. There's no data like more data is the slogan. So those are very large data sets usually. And then test data to evaluate how well something's doing on a particular task. And those data sets tend to be smaller. All right, so that's how we use data in NLP. Why do we need data statements? Well, the first thing is that we see that systems trained on naturally occurring text learn the biases held by the authors of the text, right? Naturally occurring text isn't just patterns of words, but it's actually people expressing things and their ideas, including their prejudices. And there's a lot of work now, starting with Bullock-Bassi in 2016 and Kaliskan in 2017. Those were contemporaneous. Documenting how word embeddings, that is representations of words in terms of what else they co-occur with in these large language models, pick up biases about gender, about race and ethnicity, about many identity categories, really. Blodgett et al. 2020 is a wonderful summary of everything that's happened up until 2020. So not only do these systems pick up biases from the data, but they also can amplify the biases that they learn. The other thing is that systems trained on one subpopulation don't work as well for others, right? If everyone's seen this, right? So speech recognition is going to work particularly well only for a subset of varieties of a subset of the world's languages. And if you don't speak those varieties, you're going to have a harder time getting the speech recognition system to work for you. All right. So why do we need something like data statements? Well, when we are building NLP software, we're doing two things. We are learning patterns in language qua language, right? We are modeling what does language look like as a system. But this software is also built to learn knowledge about the world from what people say about the world. And so at both of those levels, we really need to pay attention to what's in the data, whose language variety and whose view of the world are we building systems to model. Now, we can strive to have data sets that are better in these respects, right? The ideal would be something that represents the full population we intend our software to work for and is also fully debiased. That's a mythical endpoint. We're never going to achieve that. So instead, even as we strive in that direction, even as we avoid putting in sort of the worst things in terms of prejudice language input, and even as we try to get pretty good samples of the population, we still need to seek other strategies for mitigating the scientific and ethical shortcomings of imperfect data sets, because they will always be imperfect. So our proposal, called Data Statements for Natural Language Processing, is all about foregrounding the characteristics of our data sets. We want dataset creators to make it clear which populations are and are not represented, to support people who are taking on those data sets or taking on technology built on those data sets to be able to reason about any possible mismatches and what their effects may be. We want people to be able to recognize limitations of both training and test data. All right, so if your training data doesn't match your application context, that's a problem. So the training data is going to place limits on how systems can be appropriately deployed. And the test data, similarly, is going to limit what we can measure and claim about system performance. What is it that we're actually measuring in the world? It's not how well this thing works on natural language or even English, but some specific variety of some specific language. Also, we want to contribute to a cultural documentation, where this idea is that you can't just grab whatever data is out there and pull it in and throw it into the maw of the big machine learning system, because then you don't know what you've built. And so we want to create this culture where you build data sets thoughtfully and curate them, and in fact, only build them as big as you can actually document them. So one question that we asked once we had that initial proposal was, how do we support uptake of this practice? So back in Bender and Friedman 2018, we came up with the first version of the data statement schema. And then we went through this practice called value scenarios, thinking about what would happen if this got taken up, and the good and the bad. And one thing that we came across through that practice was thinking about, what if we've designed something that is exclusive in itself, that makes it hard for researchers in different contexts to actually participate? So in order to mitigate that risk, we thought we would hold a workshop where we brought together researchers from around the world to work with them to create data statements and see what could be done better, see what best practices are, see what we need to revise. So we held that workshop in May of 2020, associated with LREC, and we asked through the process of the workshop, how should our schema be updated to better support the range of projects it might be used for in the international NLP community? And how can we support researchers in a wide range of institutional contexts in writing data statements? And then finally, how do we facilitate research community uptake of this practice? So the online workshop spread across 3 days, 2 hours a day. We had researchers from 16 countries across all continents except Antarctica. And we put them into small groups where they worked together. So each group represented 2 different data set projects, and they interviewed each other to elicit what kind of information should go into the data statement, which is far easier than just sitting down and trying to write it, much more friendly to answer somebody else's questions. They also, in an offline context, reviewed each other's draft data statements and provided feedback. And then we had some medium group discussions where we did reflections on the process of the workshop and the practice of data statements. We analyzed all of this by transcribing those discussions and then going through and coding them for emergent themes, the 3 authors of this paper. And we met together to merge our themes into a single taxonomy. And then also we looked at the data statement worksheets that they had worked through for additions to that taxonomy. And that led to a revision of the schema and initial set of best practices. And then we compared all of that to another similar proposal called data sheets for data sets to identify further possible changes. The upshot of all that is the revised schema. And this is a graphic that shows how version 1 became version 2. And you can see we have more elements. We moved some things around. For example, we found that people had a really hard time distinguishing speech situation and text characteristics. So we just merged those. So we now have this revised schema. And associated with it, we have a guide for writing data statements with best practices. So for each of the 15 elements, this guide talks about why you want to write them, both from the perspective of the person doing the writing and from the person doing the reading, what goes into them, and then some best practices per element, as well as some general best practices. This guide, along with templates for data statements in a few different formats, are all available on our website there. And I'm very eager to talk with people at the LSA about how this practice could be applicable in the context of linguistics and the way we use our data sets in linguistics, not for building language technology necessarily, but for doing our own research and supporting each other's research. So thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to discussing further.